The mistake happened in silence, not with an explosion or a declaration of war, but with a decision made in confidence. Adolf Hitler believed he was unbeatable. For a brief moment in history, it looked like he was right. Europe was collapsing, armies were surrendering, and the world was watching in shock. But hidden inside his greatest victories was a single, fatal error, one that would slowly turn triumph into catastrophe and ultimately destroy the Third Reich. In the early years appeared unstoppable. Poland fell in weeks. Denmark and Norway followed. Then came France, a nation many believed could never be defeated so quickly. In just 6 weeks, the French army collapsed, and British forces barely escaped at Dunkirk. To millions of Americans watching from across the Atlantic, Hitler seemed like a dark genius of war, a man rewriting history with lightning speed. Newspapers called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it worked terrifyingly well. Hitler was intoxicated by success. Every victory reinforced his belief that he was not just Germany's leader, but a military mastermind chosen by destiny. Generals who questioned him were dismissed or ignored. Intelligence reports that contradicted his beliefs were brushed aside. This growing arrogance would shape the decision that changed everything. Only Britain remained defiant. The German Air Force bombed British cities night after night, but the Royal Air Force refused to break. For the first time, Hitler faced resistance he could not crush quickly. Instead of reassessing, he grew impatient. Britain, he believed, was only holding on because it hoped for help from the United States or from the Soviet Union, and that thought planted a dangerous idea. To Hitler, the Soviet Union was not just a rival. He saw it as an ideological enemy, a racial enemy, and a future prize. Long before the war began, Hitler had written about conquering the East to gain living space for the German people. Now, with Western Europe subdued, he believed the time had come. If the Soviet Union fell, Britain would be isolated. The war, in Hitler's mind, would be over. Many of his generals warned him. Germany was already fighting a major war. Opening a second massive front, they argued, was reckless. The Soviet Union was vast, unpredictable, and resource-heavy. Its winters were legendary. Its manpower seemed endless. But Hitler dismissed these concerns. He believed the Red Army was weak, poorly led, and would collapse just like France. This belief would become his biggest mistake. On June 22, 1941, without a formal declaration of war, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. Nearly 4 million Axis troops surged across the Soviet border. Tanks rolled forward, aircraft filled the skies, and entire Soviet divisions were encircled and destroyed. In the opening weeks, it looked like Hitler was right again. American newspapers reported staggering numbers. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers captured, entire cities falling in days. To many observers, it seemed the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. Hitler was confident the war in the East would be finished before winter. But the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, it bent hand, then it hardened. As German forces pushed deeper, the distances grew vast. Supply lines stretched thin. Roads turned to mud. Railways were incompatible. Fuel and ammunition became harder to deliver. Soviet troops, though suffering horrific losses, kept fighting. Factories were dismantled and moved east beyond German reach. Civilians joined the war effort with grim determination. And then came the weather. By October, the rains began. The infamous Russian mud swallowed tanks and trucks. German soldiers, unprepared for prolonged fighting, struggled to move forward. Still, Hitler refused to slow down. He diverted forces toward Ukraine instead of focusing on Moscow, believing economic targets were more important than political ones. This delay would prove disastrous. Soldiers lacked proper winter clothing. Weapons froze. Frostbite claimed thousands. Meanwhile, Soviet troops, reorganized and hardened by desperation, launched counterattacks. For the first time, Hitler's army was pushed back. The myth of German invincibility shattered in the snow outside Moscow. It was a moment the world noticed. In the United States, military planners took note. Hitler could be stopped. He could be beaten. But instead of learning from this near disaster, Hitler doubled down. He blamed his generals. He took direct control of military decisions. Orders became rigid and unrealistic. Retreats were forbidden, even when they made strategic sense. Entire armies were ordered to hold ground at all costs. The result was annihilation. Nowhere was this more evident than at Stalingrad. In 1942, Hitler launched another major offensive, this time toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. Oil was the lifeblood of modern warfare, and Germany was running low. Stalingrad, a city bearing Stalin's name, became a symbolic target. Hitler wanted it captured at any cost. The fighting that followed was some of the most brutal in human history, street by street, room by room. Soldiers fought among ruins, corpses, and fire. The German Sixth Army became trapped in the city as Soviet forces encircled them. High promised resupply by era promise that could not be kept. Winter returned. Food ran out. Ammunition dwindled. Wounded soldiers froze. In February 1943, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered. Over 90,000 German soldiers were captured. Few would ever return home. Stalingrad was not just a defeat. It was a turning point. From that moment on, the war changed direction. The Soviet Union went on the offensive, pushing westward with relentless force. Germany, now locked in a war of attrition it could never win, began to bleed resources and men at an unsustainable rate. And still, Hitler refused to adapt. As the Eastern Front consumed the bulk of Germany's strength, the United States entered the war. American industry roared to life. Factories produced tanks, planes, ships, and weapons on a scale the world had never seen. Hitler now faced exactly what he had hoped to avoid: a powerful alliance of enemies on multiple fronts. In 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy. The long-awaited invasion of Western Europe had begun. German defenses, weakened by years of fighting in the East, struggled to respond. Hitler hesitated, misjudged, and delayed. His belief in miracle weapons and last-minute reversals replaced sound strategy. Even as Allied armies closed in from the west and Soviet forces advanced from the east, Hitler clung to fantasies of victory. Cities were ordered to fight to the last man. Civilians suffered. Germany was reduced to rubble. By the time American and Soviet troops met on the Elbe River in 1945, the outcome was inevitable. Hitler retreated into his bunker in Berlin. Surrounded by the ruins of the empire he had built, the man who once dominated Europe now commanded nothing but shattered divisions and broken promises. His biggest mistake was not just invading the Soviet Union. It was believing that willpower could replace reality, that ideology could overcome logistics, that destiny could defeat geography, climate, and human resistance. For American audiences, Hitler's failure carries a powerful lesson. Military strength alone does not guarantee victory. Overconfidence can be as deadly as any enemy. The United States, watching from afar in the early years of the war, learned that even the most terrifying force can be undone by arrogance and miscalculation. Hitler gambled everything on a war he did not understand. He underestimated his enemies. He ignored advice. He refused to adapt. And in doing so, he ensured his own destruction. The war ended not with the triumph he imagined, but with silence in a bunker, as the world he tried to dominate moved on without him. His biggest mistake was believing he could bend history. The end bent him instead.